Okay. I'm just waiting another couple of minutes, see if anybody shows up.
Well, I know they're all waiting for the big one next week, so, but I do appreciate you doing this.
Well, this will be informative too, and the big one next week will be different. So first, see the title, Sky is Falling. I want to see if people online can hear this.
How long did it take you to find that?
No,
You didn't hear that?
it breaks out more than every other word.
Ah, well, that's the robot from Lost in Space saying, "Danger, Will Robinson, don't go there." Just so you guys know, the sky is not falling. But everybody thinks the sky is falling. Let's see if I can play the other one.
Does not compute, does not compute, does not compute.
Did you hear that, Dixie?
About the same.
Yeah, he said it does not compute, does not compute, does not compute. So here's the thing, guys, you all know this. You see it in our industry. Somebody gets this settlement, they read a few lines, and then they blow the whole thing up way beyond what it really is. They don't read enough in to know what's going on. But then we have the news people doing the same thing. So these are the headlines that I pulled down on Saturday. Could be the end of 6%. Settlement eliminates 6%.
Does not compute.
Oh, sorry.
It's kind of appropriate, right? Kind of appropriate.
Nash agrees to slash commissions. Realtor settlement makes seismic shift to housing market. Real estate lawsuit upends decade-long policies. Realtors agree to act 6% commissions in the NAR lawsuit. And what the realtor lawsuit means for home buyers and sellers. So first off, let me point out that everybody who wrote a headline did not capitalize realtor or use the R at in the end of it like they're supposed to. So they don't know how to write headlines. Secondly, they didn't read this very thoroughly. And I was gonna wait another week to give this little talk because every day something's changing. So the first attorney that I read that analyzed this and sent out his take on it on Saturday. By Sunday, he had changed and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, this is great for realtors." Then he says, "Oh, wait a minute, I missed all this stuff. It's not good for realtors at all." And every day there's a new addition. An example would be yesterday in the afternoon, the attorneys who are on the other side and NAR came out and said, the realtors on the other side said, everybody has settled except Berkshire Hathaway. So we want them to be responsible for the $4 billion judgment we got, and we'll just take the settlement from everybody else. You follow me on that? Isn't that horrific? So every day things are changing. And I want you to know that as they're changing, don't get too upset about what's going on. But let's get some of the preliminaries out of the way, because on Facebook and other realtor blogs and stuff, they've got some real crap going on. And they are wrong on so many things. So let's look at what the settlement, what's going to happen next. This is a copy of the front page. It's 108 pages long. I have read all of them now. But the next step is, between now and probably the end of May, a judge has to approve this settlement before it goes into effect. So when your clients see these headlines that I just showed you, They think that started yesterday. Or they're gonna call you and say, I'm gonna cut my commission, or I want some money back from when you sold the house. Fact is, Brenda, I'm using her by the way. Brenda had a realtor who called Saturday and said, we've got your offer, but the only way we're going to accept it is if you cut your commission by 0.5%. Because the seller cut the other side 0.5% as well, because he saw the headlines. You have to learn how to talk to your clients. Nothing has happened yet. But the headlines make it sound terrible. One of the things that may happen, there was another settlement that was done in the Northeast 6 months ago. And the Department of Justice weighed in and said, we don't think it's gone far enough, so they threw out the settlement.
Recording in progress.
Did you get that? They threw out that settlement that both sides agreed to, and the judge was agreed to, but the Department of Justice said it's not good enough. So when I say we're at the very beginning of a settlement, it's a proposed settlement, and keep using those words. It is proposed. We have to go through a whole bunch of stuff. Proposed becomes reality. Okay? Next step. This thing came out on Monday. And reading through the proposed settlement, a couple of attorneys discovered, hey, every brokerage, not company, brokerage, that is over 2 billion in sales is going to have to pay money. And the rest of us that are under 2 billion in sales don't have to pay money. Now, NAR is paying our money for us, but take this into consideration. EXP is one company. Remember how you get to state, you're a broker for the state, but it's one company everywhere. It's not a franchise. They had $159 billion in sales last year. They would have to appeal this, and to be part of this settlement, they have to write a check for $400 million and set it to an escrow account until this is settled. Or if they don't have enough money to do that, within 110 days, they have to meet with a mediator, non-binding mediation, to discuss what money they can come up with. So there's so many moving parts in this. Don't let your sellers and everybody else get in it. If I'm EXP, Douglas Ellison, Real Brokers, up in Chicago, it's Baird Warner. Cry Lake is another one that's in Illinois. These are people that have one large brokerage across multiple states that sold over $2 billion worth of sales. And there's a figure that they have to go through. And non-realtor companies don't have to comply. So I'm going to take this in 2 steps.
Question,
Yes, sir.
non-realtors don't have to comply,
Right.
but then non-realtors are not covered under the umbrella of the settlement then, correct?
Non-realtors have not been sued. If we had non-realtors in this company, theoretically we could be, but we are protected by the Anywhere settlement. So there's, you see this nasty headline and there's so much to it. So if I'm a large brokerage, say EXP, and I found a realtor organization sold me out in lieu of the smaller brokers, I might have a problem with that. I don't have to post money. You don't have to post money. But as part of the settlement process, the lawyers determined EXP's got to pay a big bunch of money. Could they call NAR and sue them and gum up the works even more? Yes. So as we're going through this initial thing, I just want you to know there's a lot of stuff that hasn't happened yet. And I want to give you kind of the bare bones of what could happen as early as July. Any questions? So far? If the settlement is approved, and if the settlement is not held up by anybody else, we have a timeline that says within X number of days after the notice has been given to everybody, we have to implement the following rule changes. The earliest that I think that can happen is mid-July. But remember, that means that everybody's got to prove it, and then they have to send out a notice to all of the clients that are represented in this lawsuit. And by the way, under the current settlement, it is estimated the past clients that are in the lawsuit will receive between $12 and $18. They're expecting to get, thousands, but it's $12 to $18 based on how much the lawyers get and how many people are in it. So if the changes come into effect, the following is the changes that is required in the settlement. There will no longer be an offer to compensate in the MLS, or there's no longer a requirement. Now, over the last 6 months or so, people have said, okay, you can put in zero, you don't have to put in a percentage, you don't have to put in compensation. But in the past, MLS required, if you don't have compensation, you can't put it in the MLS. That has to be eliminated. You also have to eliminate any brokers offering compensation buyer agents in the MLS. Keep this in mind, that's in the MLS. We'll get to a little bit more in just a second. The MLS is not allowed to create a separate website for the different brokerages to go in and say, this is how much compensation I'm offering. One of the questions I have that hasn't been answered yet is, can I put it in the showing instructions of Broker Bay? So the agent sees the showing instructions, this is how much compensation is offered. I don't know yet, because they also say they can't allow data feed to a site that displays multiple brokers for compensation. Now, having said that, sorry, I'm dry this morning. Your sellers can still offer compensation to a buyer's agent. You just can't show it in the MLS. We can put it on our company website. We can do Facebook ads and say, on this listing, we're offering X number of buyer agency compensation. But we cannot create a website by a group of brokers that say, here's all the compensation that we agree on, because if there's more than one brokerage on that website, you can't display the compensation. Chris?
I have heard some obviously horrible information on Facebook that if we did that, put it on Facebook, put it on website, company website, that we're not allowed to use the word compensation. Do you know if that's true or not? And I know I'm asking you to crystal ball
No,
this shit. But
I personally think it's probably a speculation. And if we need to rename it, that wouldn't be horrible. We're offering X number of dollars to the buyer agent that brings a successful closing, so on and so forth. That's far down the road yet to me. You're right, it's crystal ball. But there is nothing, because it's stated specifically in this proposal, there is nothing that keeps the seller from offering buyer agent compensation or paying it. You just can't put it in the MLS. And so why that is important, in the past, the MLS became our contractual obligation to pay compensation to the buyer agent. We no longer have that. It'll have to be negotiated independently. they must create and allow fields for seller concessions. So if the seller offers to pay loan costs, if the seller offers to pay prepaids, or if the seller says, I'm giving concessions in X amount of dollars, the seller can do that via the MLS, as long as the buyer agent gets none of that. Oh, yeah. It says specifically,
Oh,
you can offer concessions, but the buyer agent cannot receive any of that concession money.
oh, I'm glad you said that, because we were under a completely different.
It's quite specific in the, okay? And in fact, you can see that down here, as long as you use all the money. Yeah, anyway,
Okay, so you're saying, okay, you're saying that if it's offered, if concessions are offered through the MLS, none of those concessions can be used for buyer agency pay.
correct. Or
But-
reimbursement or receiving in any way.
Okay, but it doesn't mean that if more concessions were added on that weren't part of the MLS offerings, that it couldn't go for buyer pay.
Correct.
Okay.
So one of the things they talked about is that we will very much be going in towards the way commercial real estate does right now. Commercial real estate has no offer of 3%. Oh, we got questions? Sorry.
Something.
The commission is a contractual agreement between buyers and listing clients, and they understand what they're complaining to. What is the complaint? Why did they expect us professionals to agree to work for nothing? Well, they don't expect that, but they want it to be a lot more obvious. So let's talk about what the buyer agent changes are going to be. If a property is offered in the MLS, and if you're going to show a property in the MLS, they are requiring the realtor organization to tell you to have a buyer agency agreement before you show the home. Let me repeat that so you get it clear. If you're showing a property offered in the MLS, and if you're going to be representing the buyer, which is about the only way you can get paid unless we're going to offer sub-agency, then you must have a written buyer agency prior to showing the home, according to the realtor organization. We're going to delve into that a little deeper in just a second.
Greg, can you shrink that stuff down to the bottom? So you can see the
Or
whole-
turn it to the left.
I don't know how to get rid of this.
Here you go, turn it to the left. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay. In that buyer agency, you have to say what you are going to accept as a buyer agent, either as a percentage rate of the price or as a straight dollar amount. And I expect that some of your buyers are going to say, well, wait a minute, I'm gonna have to pay you X? Well, yeah. Because it used to be paid for by the seller. And we're gonna have some discussion at the end that's just gonna be open discussion. But your buyer agency agreement must display the rate or the dollar amount you're going to accept to help that buyer. You cannot have an open-ended statement. So in the old days, our buyer agency agreement said, I'm going to get 3.5%. And I will accept as much as the seller agent offers. And then you have to pay the rest. You cannot do that with the new buyer agencies if this settlement is accepted. You must say specifically what you're going to accept. So let's take, for instance, Tulio's got one of his past clients that he just absolutely adores. And he says, I'll be your buyer agent for 1%. And he writes the contract before he shows the house. but the seller's offering 3%. Too bad, Julio, you can only take one, because that's what the buyer agency says. You understand that? Yes, Pam?
Can't you write in miscellaneous, something to the effect of?
Nope, cannot be, specifically says cannot be open-ended.
It sounds like to me, as you were talking about this earlier, I'd almost rather have a buyer agency agreement, just a single page form with that buyer for that particular showing. That way I can say, okay, well, I talked to the listing agent, they're only offering 2, so you're gonna pay 1% for this house. Oh, we'll go to the next one. Here's the form for this one.
You're probably not wrong, but wait, there's more. The total amount the buyer agent is paid cannot exceed the amount in agency agreement. And you absolutely cannot say your services are free, period.
But that doesn't mean we can't, like in your example, that doesn't mean we couldn't go back to the buyer and say, I'm crossing out 1 and putting 3 in here because that's what they're offering and initial it. In the buyer agency contract.
Technically, but the settlement is trying to make it so cut and dry that you can't do that. Now, that's what they're trying to do. But there's also another thing that they say in the settlement. These are only houses that are in the MLS. Because that's all the realtors have domain over. So if you've got a non-realtor listing out there with a sign on it, you're wide open to do buyer agency like we used to do. But there's another caveat in each statement of this settlement that says, as long as it does not violate or alter federal or state law. So the Kansas law says you must establish the agency prior to writing a contract. All of the realtor stuff that comes out says you have to sign it prior to showing the first home. I expect there will be somebody somewhere discussing, does that go against Kansas law? Because they say explicitly must be written before you write the contract. Whether that's a winning argument or not, I don't know. So when I tell you that there's a lot of moving pieces that haven't been decided yet and things are going on, believe me, people are still interpreting this. On Monday, the Keller Williams kind of came up with this. Yes, ma'am?
There's a chat.
Thank you. Can that be amended? Well, Chris had asked that. But if you listen to the realtors, they're trying to make it so it can't be. Or if it is being amended, it's got to be with your buyer's full knowledge of what's going on. So I suppose that it could be, but I've not seen anybody pose that question yet. In my mind, all contracts can be amended as long as both parties agree. So these are changes that are coming for both the buyer side and the seller side if this proposal is agreed to, and no sooner than I figure mid-July. On all buyer and listing documents, you have to have a conspicuous statement that says commissions are not set by law and all fees are fully negotiable. And they are quite blatant that these have to be non-conspicuous. These have to be very conspicuous statements. So when you're going through a listing with somebody, you're going to have to get to the point that says, I charge 3% for what I do. And they say, well, you negotiate. Yes, they are all fully negotiable. Now, whether you're willing to bend on that is a whole nother story. But they want it written in the listing agreements that all fees are fully negotiable.
So I could just tell them, I'd be happy to negotiate a higher rate.
Absolutely,
So will that be a pre-printed part in the new contract?
absolutely.
And a part of that is, as Greg and I were coming off the MLS Board of Directors, we kind of all saw this coming, this type of stuff coming, and it's my understanding RSCK is already working on
Yeah.
rewriting the listing and buyer agency agreements.
That's true, but until last Friday with the settlement, we didn't know the explicit language they wanted in. So they probably will have to work on it even further.
And I think it needs to be said that our association has done a pretty decent job trying to stay ahead of this.
They have. They
Now,
have,
Greg,
yes,
with talking about all this buyer agency agreements and everything, have you read anything in there about does that or how that will affect people coming to open houses?
just like an open house is now. And just like you do now for a listing, you can sell a listing to anybody without having a buyer agency. Now, I'm gonna tell you my
Or you
opinion,
show them a house
Well,
though.
if it,
without signed by your
if it
agency.
comes down where they have to do it.
only if you are going to represent them as a buyer agent. You can sell it to them direct,
They'd be a customer, not a client.
they would be a customer.
Right, but if they put into law that I have to sign a buyer agency agreement before I show somebody
You
else.
can't do that because it's dual, that would be dual agency because you're
But
listing
That's the
agreement.
But it
problem
would-
here in Kansas, but it's not a problem in California.
But also it's not dual agency to have somebody under contract, buyer and seller,
unless
to
they
show
want
the
that
house. It only triggers dual agency if you write the offer. So I'm wondering if they're gonna, you know what I mean? Cause
Right.
you can have them under contract and show the house, doesn't mean anything till you write the offer. But if they put that, if the legislature does that, then what do you know, Erica's right, when we do it at an open house, just have a big stack.
Well,
You know,
yeah.
Well, I'm gonna
you know, one day.
I'm gonna tell you a quick story about when buyer agency first started in this state. And then really, I've got 2 pages of let's discuss things at the end with different questions, so.
And I know you don't wanna get too deep because
Right.
next Tuesday is gonna be deep.
And because we don't know yet, but when buyer agency first started here, there was someone who used to work at the radio station that you know. Who sat in open houses and everybody came in and said, sign this up buyer agency, go find your house and call me when you found it. And he did that for dozens of people. It's not gonna change anything we're all doing in that respect. You still have statutory and fiduciary duties to your client. So, in an open house, it may mess with procuring cause ultimately, if they bring a buyer agent. But that's a whole nother discussion and goes down to compensation. You are not allowed to filter or restrict any MLS listings that you communicate to your client based on the level of compensation to you as a buyer agent.
Okay, well, that just answered a question.
It's written in. That's almost word for word. And then it says you have to create educational materials that reflect everything. And discard any educational materials that reference the old way. What they don't say is who those materials have to be distributed to. Do we have to give them to the public? Do we have to give them to real estate agents so they know the new rules? Doesn't say that, not in the proposed settlement. And again, this is all proposed. We're all speculating right now.
It says you have to show. Even you can't, anything you send to your client, you have to show them, even if you're not getting compensated.
Correct.
I'm not fucking working for free.
But couldn't you have the, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Couldn't you have, I mean, it doesn't restrict you from saying to your client, hey, I'm showing you everything, but I wanna let you know before we go, I have like, I don't know, called the agent and found out they're not offering anything. If you still wanna go see this house, know that the full amount is on you. I mean, was that reasonable?
You
But that's the
can
way,
absolutely do that.
but that's the way it has been up to this point. You can go in the MLS and if they're, right now, you go in the MLS and if Sandra's offering a listing at only 2% commission, we are still required to show that by our ethics
Yeah.
and so forth. That's when you have to have that conversation with the buyer. They're only offering 2 per our buyer agency agreement. You're gonna be responsible for paying the 1%. I had this happen just a few months ago with a relocation customer, and okay, I'm willing to pay that.
Or when you write the offer, we're gonna throw out all the rules about negotiating compensation on the contract. You're offering 2, but my buyer is obligated to 3. The buyer is asking a concession from you to pay for that other 1%. That can be negotiated.
1% towards estimated or closing costs, prepaids, et cetera, et cetera.
No, 1% to the buyer agent.
Toward your fee, yeah.
You've got
Just
to
straight
call
to
it
the fee.
out, because the lender will not allow that to be considered a closing cost at
Right.
this point.
Well, that's what the analogy I've been using. If you have a $200,000 home and you're only gonna get 1% on it, then write the offer for 204.
Well-
And estimate pay the 3.
That may be, but I think the bigger issue we're gonna find out is how much a buyer agent is willing to sign a contract for us to show a house. I know that we all have a percentage that we think our value is, and we're gonna talk later about what your values are and how to get there. But we all know there's gonna be some broke real estate agent out there, a podunk company that's a part-time agent that says, I'll show you houses for 1%. And that's what we have to compete against based on us being professionals and how we do things. You can have the seller pay the commission, absolutely,
You've got another chat.
but let's go back to this one. Sellers agree to compensate buyer's agent and agree to let you post in the MLS in writing, then what's the harm? Well, the harm is the National Association of Realtors says we have to eliminate the field that shows it, and we're not allowed to offer compensation in the MLS at all.
This is gonna still screw the pooch on values of properties.
I have a thought that I will just write in the offer each time, exactly what the buyers expects is, yes, that would work. Because you're negotiating then, and that's fine. So let me throw out some thoughts here, and when I'm putting questions up there, everything from here on out is open discussion. And we can sit in here as long as you want, or cut it short and wait till next week. We already talked about when it cannot take effect earlier than July. How do you talk to clients now? Has anybody gone to a listing that says, hey, I just saw all these articles, I want to cut my fee? Chris, you don't go to listings.
Brenda did.
Okay,
Do you want me to say what happened or no? Or was that just?
sure, this is open discussion from
You have
here on
another
out.
chat. You may want to just leave the chat open.
Yeah, I can do that now. Can we put it in broker bay? Earlier, I showed you a slide that says the MLS cannot send data to somebody who's gonna aggregate multiple brokerages, offer compensation. So in answer to that, if you put it in the showing instructions, has the MLS violated that rule? And I don't know yet. I don't think anybody knows. To me, it would be obvious and smart to put it in the showing instructions. This seller is offering compensation. This seller is offering to compensate at X number of percentage. We can still read that once we're setting up the showing. That's different than having a website displaying everything with all the compensation on.
Yes and no.
But until it's tested, who knows? Chris, how do you talk to clients now?
So Brenda, ever since Greg and Tracy have had the wonderful idea of parking spots as a competition, Brenda, which we really do enjoy, Brenda has decided that she was going to make it her mission to list everything in sight,
We need it.
right? So, I don't know, Brenda's taken, 4 or 5 listings over the last couple of weeks. Which consequently means when this news broke, she's been sitting in front of
The whole shitload of
right, a crap ton of people. So, and they started talking about what was happening. So Brenda on the fly, right? I mean, there's nothing in writing, there's nothing, but she's changed her dialogue to say right now. She said, obviously you saw what was going on because the people were talking about that and what was happening, what the heck's going on. She said, obviously you saw what was going on. And I'm gonna tell you right now that, as she's always said for years, my marketing fee is 3%. I highly recommend that you offer 3% to anybody who brings an offer, but I must tell you, you do not have to offer anything. You don't have to offer anything. Now, it's kind of a weird point right now because according to the MLS right now, we still have to because the rules haven't been changed.
Yep.
So she's just said, she's been telling everybody, you don't have to, you can put in $1. I don't recommend that. I think it's not something that's good for you to do. And they've talked about it and the people have asked whether or not it was a good strategy or not. What she has found out over the last 3 listings that she's been on is every one of the sellers she sat in front of and has explained what's changed and explained why it's changing. Every one of them has said to her, that don't make no damn sense. If anybody brings me a buyer, I'm gonna pay them. Right? It doesn't make any damn sense. Half of the people she went and visited with were buying a house from her too, right? You know, both of them. And they said, well, of course I'm going to offer 3% because when I go buy my house, somebody's giving you 3% for that. So the conversation is a little wonky. The people are asking what it's about right now and how it's going to affect. And she's just telling them straight out, you don't have to, but it's really not a good idea.
Well, I would offer a fine point to a listing, and I agree with everything you said. That was good. When I'm in a listing appointment, they said, well, I don't want to offer 3%. Okay, do you want to decrease your house 3%? Because you don't get dime one until you go to closing and the buyer is paying everything. It's not your money, it's your side of the transaction. The buyer's paying all of it. And if you want them to come up with money on their own, great, we'll do that.
Now, I will also say we have been toying with the idea and just toying. We haven't had the stones to do it yet, but once we're toying with the idea of actually raising our listing fee to 4% or more. Because if they're not paying the other side. More. So just something to think about.
Marie's kicking in. How many other professions agree they won't advertise what they charge? Our net sheet says percentage to listing agent and percentage to buyer agent. So why is that now a problem? Because a whole bunch of lawyers got together and sued a lot of people so they could make a whole lot of money because the general public, in their belief, said 6% was the charge. It's known nationwide. Y'all have been constraining competition. Therefore, we're going to make it equal for everybody. That's why, Marie.
Just like the gas stations say they aren't doing the same thing.
I know. And doctors never, see what other doctors are charging. But we're also.
Problem is, gas stations have a much more powerful lobby than us.
Oh, they also are posting.
Lawyers are suing us over.
Okay, let me move on to the next question. How can I find out if compensation is
Okay, we should be done in about 15 minutes. I'll give you a call back. Okay.
I don't know where she's at.
Bring up the big one, the mini dots. There you go, right there.
Okay, sounds like we're good now. The speculation is on the internet that you will have to call the other agent prior to showing and ask them, are you offering compensation? Unless they've already put it in the showing instructions. But for me, I want to know if they're offering compensation before I show the home, because I want to inform my client what their obligation is going to be. I'm not trying to steer people away from houses that aren't offering compensation, but the buyer should know what their obligation will be and that we need to negotiate that on this home. Now, that may become a very common conversation when you first sign the buyer agent. We see a home that doesn't offer it, how do you want to handle it? Here's some thoughts I've had in the past. Okay,
See, I think that that's gonna open up a whole new problem. You're gonna get a buyer who says, well, why didn't you show me this house? Well, because you need seller concessions because you have almost no money to close. You barely have your 3.5%. Well, but I wanted to see this one, but you can't afford my commission. They're not offering any.
well, I don't know that I would say it that way. I would say in the beginning, you told me not to show you houses because I've already had that conversation. If I don't have that conversation in the beginning, then the expectation will be, I'll show them anything. Can sellers still? Well, there have been several people. that thought of that. As well as several people think we ought to be suing NAR for making us do things that might not have been. But they're already down to pennies. They don't have any money left. Can sellers still offer or pay compensation? Absolutely. You can have the same agreement we have now. Seller's gonna list for 2%, but will offer 3%. They can do that. You just can't put it in the MLS. Yes. Oh, no, you cannot have concessions in the MLS and any of that money go to the realtor. Cannot happen. It's gotta be shown that it went to closing costs, prepays, whatever. What if the seller's offering more than my client agreed to? Well, according to what they're trying to get to, you would lose. What we're saying might be acceptable, but I'd want to talk to an attorney first. They're offering more. Can I, change my buyer agency agreement with you? Would you be okay with that? But what they're trying to get to is, no, you can't do that.
You just show them, you just do a per house buyer agency agreement. It's fine.
How can we show compensation is being offered? I think we kind of talked about that. So more thoughts. What if we sign a buyer agency at 3% and in the end you get 2%? You can always accept less than your contract says. You cannot accept more.
Dixie said a thing, what if we sign a buyer agency at 3 and in the end you get 2?
That's what you can always get less. You can't get more. So let's see if my next thoughts will come up. Does this change any Kansas law? Absolutely not.
Not yet.
Yeah,
Doesn't change federal law either.
question on that.
Yeah.
Question on that, Greg. Did you read anywhere in that 108-page thingy that anywhere in there that the settlement was going to, I don't know how to put this properly, ask or recommend, or the judge can order or whatever, that legislatures in the state review some laws?
No, in fact, they were specific that if this violates any of the state or federal laws, you go with the law.
I was like specifically thinking about like what Lance was talking about with dual agency and stuff like that. And transactional broker. So, okay.
So what if a non-MLS agent brings you an offer? What do you do now when a non-MLS agent brings you an offer?
Screw 'em. Oh, no. That was supposed to be funny, guys. It was supposed to be funny. You guys are a little too serious right now.
So effectively, remember, this is Realtor MLS recommendations or settlement. If they're not a Realtor, if they're not in the MLS, you negotiate with them now, just like you do now. Okay, here's an open question for y'all. Chris already said they're considering raising their commission price to 4. What do you guys think you ought to do?
Our listing agreement's going to change right now. It
Yes,
says we agreed to allow cooperation and compensation to buyer's agents. Are we going to start seeing a change in the amount? Maybe you talked about this.
it's not the amount, but it's gotta have conspicuous language that the commission rate is not set by law and it is negotiable.
So we're still ambiguous in the listing agreement regarding buyer agent compensation.
I think ultimately it will be spelled out because the MLS has already talked about wanting to change that to spell it out.
Okay.
So this would be in addition to that change we felt was,
So we have in the contract that they're gonna pay 3%, we just can't put it in the MLS.
correct.
That's so bananas.
Is there going to be another document that you know of that's going to be an addendum to the purchase agreement that allows,
Hmm.
you know, when you write the contract, so an addendum, not an amendment, right? That allows for this commission to be agreed upon between the companies or between, you know, is there gonna be a document made for that?
No idea.
There's already a commission agreement.
I know, but more of a formal one that can be an actual addendum to the contract.
That would have to be signed by the brokers.
See, part of the problem is we've got to implement these rules from NAR, where we're living with Kansas law that says you're a real estate agent, can't accept a check. It has to be broker to broker. Now, will I back you on whatever you want to accept or pay? Of course I will. But there are companies out there that will not allow you. I got one this week. You can't discount the commission rate. It was on Brenda's deal. Unless I, the broker, signed a paper that says I will accept it. I don't know what that means with Kansas law yet. That's why, again, I want to do this preliminary one, but next week I hope to have some more information.
You've got a couple of questions.
And while
You've
he's,
got like 3 now.
and then Greg called up and gave Brenda some crap and said, just wanna let you know I'm not signing this, I don't agree with it.
Do you expect down the line that the listing commission being raised to 6%, so we have it up front to offer? I think it very well could. I think what we have to do is see where the rest of our competition goes to. If you start getting phone calls that say, I'll list your house for 2% and we'll offer nothing, well, that's what you have to compete against. So they're trying to push us into a much more open market than we have been. Does the non-MLS include if an agent is a member in an MLS, but not a member in the MLS where the listing is? Well, we're gonna get to what teeth this has, but I think no. They're saying that realtors need to do these things. If we call the listing agent about compensation, do we need to get it in writing so they don't change their mind? I think you call them, know what it is, and make it part of your initial offer.
Right. I know.
So that would be your in writing.
As that regards, I'm showing a house this evening in Kingman, and the listing agent out there uses a national MLS, and nowhere in there does it talk about any compensation or cooperation. So when I called the agent directly to get it scheduled, that was the first question I had. Are you offering cooperation and compensation? And if so, what is it? And she shared it with me, and I said, great. Now I'm thinking back on that. I said, okay, I probably should have got that in an email or a text, but you're right. I'm going to put it in the offer if I decide to write.
You know, in the old days, we said because compensation is already being offered, the MLS is contractual obligation pay. We did not renegotiate that because we felt that the MLS rule said you can't you show a house, you're stuck with what you get. What they just did with this, if it's accepted, is say, oh, it's all because it's never stated anywhere what's compensation. You have to negotiate. So we have to get our mindset out that we don't write that in the contract anymore. Yes, absolutely, we write it in the contract now. Thank you very much.
You can just become.
Do we need to, and this is for the whole group, if we're gonna start doing that, can we put it in the purchase contract, or do we need to have a separate addendum so that lenders don't see it and say, it can't be on the
Or
purchase contract?
appraisers.
You know,
Well, here's the problem. They all know this is going on. And the appraisers are realtors anyway, mostly. I don't know what an appraiser would do. Go ahead, Cheryl.
There is so much speculation. This morning I was listening to a conversation saying, we're 1.5 million strong realtors. They're speculating that 1 million will fall out.
Yeah.
There's just huge speculation right now. I listened to a podcast, well, it was email this morning from our former president of NAR, Lee Brown. Have you guys listened to that? It was a 30-minute
Oh, I
talk.
like her.
She is fantastic, and she is so pissed right now about this. And she has some personal thoughts about this, that really turned on a light for me. So if you guys want me to share that with you, email me and I'll forward you that email. But all these questions, it's all speculation right now. We have 3 months to let the dust settle a little bit and not panic. You know, you remember back in 96 when buyer agency came to our area, there were sellers that were like, hell no, I'm not paying a broker, you know,
Yep.
so just let the dust settle. It's gonna be okay. We will survive this. Don't panic and listen to trusted, good sources. Turn off the TV with the news, turn off the negative talk, and listen to educated sources. And I really recommend you listen to Lee Brown. 2 years ago, I believe she was NAR president.
I listened to her. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, back to your point, that's what we had to do with the deal that just got, where she started, where that lady made it part of the contract, right? The negotiation and the form that Greg has sent. JPAR already has a form made up that says buyer and seller agreed to change commission to one of the following, either a percent change or a flat fee change. Like that, they already have it and it goes broker's got to sign it and everything. Now, I'm assuming JPAR was using this kind of tactic for a long time because their corporate paperwork already had that. I mean, I know they didn't make it up the last.
They had it Saturday.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and this
know they
came
didn't
out
make it up in
Friday.
the last 2 days, so I'm assuming this is a tactic that JPAR teaches, you know, put it in the MLS and then make your seller offer less. But point being, there was a whole separate amendment that went to the brokers and was nothing to do with the contract.
Come on. And I agree with Cheryl. I listened to Rob Hahn, I listened to Greg, what's his name, that came up with Cloud CMA. I listened to the president of Next Home and the attorney for an MLS in Illinois. There is so much speculation. So when I said at the beginning, it's changing every day for what people are, they're all coming up, they don't know yet. All I'm trying to get through now is, let's get some of the noise out of the way, and we'll get more in depth as we know things.
Can you
No,
just
I
send that
just
link?
wanna-
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just wanna know how to best communicate when asked the question to the public.
What are you trying to communicate?
Well, when they ask the question, what's going on, and, you know, to be able to communicate
Sure.
an answer that's intelligent.
So the first thing I'd say is there are a lot of attention grabbing headlines that mean nothing so far. Yes, there is some talk about increasing, decreasing, renegotiating, but nothing has changed yet. Nothing has been approved by a court. All they have is a proposed agreement. And just like, you know, if you read the Wall Street Journal, their headlines are very authentic and they know.
No,
Yeah.
some of the articles I've read, I mean, we are being called some really.
Oh,
bad
ridiculous.
Oh, yes, I
So,
agree.
so the Wall Street Journal has good headlines, very in-depth writing. Their paper, you know, it's column after column after column. When you read USA Today, which I like, I read it all the time, some of their headlines, you say, well, that's not what their headlines said at all. And your clients have had that similar experience. They've started to read a headline, they say, well, wait a minute, I bought it. I'm gonna read that. They get into it. So I think that's kind of an analogy you can use. I could use that it's proposed settlement. Proposed meaning there's still a lot of parties that gotta go okey dokey. The Department of Justice, the judge. NAR's got to do any finalization. And then we have the big broker problem we talked about earlier that is excluded from this settlement. But
Watch this link I'm sending you.
Okay.
It will be amazing.
I was gonna suggest you probably ought to
I'm
just
just
send that
gonna
link
get
out to everybody.
okay, so yeah, I see two people. So let me ask you guys what you think the teeth are to all this settlement.
With the teeth?
I don't think there is much.
Yeah, in other words, how are they gonna police it?
Sorry.
That's what I was wondering. Can we attach an addendum we create, like with the seller disclosure? It's an attach, it's not in the MLS. right?
You can.
I mean, I think somebody's gonna come up with something fairly practical.
I think that the people that are proposing the settlement and the lawyers don't fully understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
So an example is, they want the Realtor organization to tell you guys what to do. Now, they can force us to remove these fields from the MLS. But how are they gonna police that you have a buyer agency written before you show an MLS property? The only-
Especially when it's not licensed law.
It's not licensed law, and so the only thing that can happen under our current setup is Cheryl would have to call the board of realtors and complain about a pro standards complaint to the realtor organization. There is, and then they would have to have a hearing. And then they would have to prove it. So the board of realtors has no legal obligation to us. They're gonna make sure that you're doing things professionally. What's the hearing called? I can't think of it right now.
Grievance,
Above,
arbitration,
above that.
professional standards here.
Yeah, okay, professional standards, thank you. So if nobody turns you in, I was right, how do you know? If nobody turns you in, you haven't broken license law. You haven't, you could get a fine if somebody wants to take you down to court and prove it. But seriously, guys, how many times are you gonna want to take the time out to go to a hearing, present witnesses to prove they didn't have a buyer agency and so on and so forth? We think about these rules that they're requiring us to do. They're telling us we have to as a trade organization, but it is not law. The only thing they can do is bring you up for pro standards. They have no other authority. Now, do I think that a lot of the changes are a good idea? Yes, I think we should have been more transparent up front with our listing agreements. I think the buyer agency changes they're doing aren't all that bad. I'm not thrilled with the compensation not being the MLS, but I can understand why they're doing it.
What is the rationale behind that and not being in the MLS?
That you as an agent will filter through and find the compensation you're willing to work within. And you won't show any properties that are outside your compensation.
It's so punitive to so many people, so
But-
many buyers, and
But
it
that's,
just makes no sense.
I know, but that's why we're here, because there are people who did that. Who was it? Somebody I was talking to earlier this week. And I can't remember who it was right now, I'm sorry. Might have been Pam. It was Pam. There was a contract that was offered and somebody wanted to pay less or pay more. And the other agent said, no, it was closing being delayed for an inspection or something. And the other agent, a top named agent, a good agent, said, no, I need to close it now. Because they want the money. How many people are in here for money in our industry rather than the obligation we have to our clients? I'm not saying that you should violate what the code of ethics or what the realtor organization is saying. But I'm going to challenge you that there are going to be a lot of people who do, because what can happen to them? Go ahead, Chris.
I know you're getting ready to wrap this up because it's 11.
I got one more.
So, but anyway, my comment is, first, I want to thank you for doing this. And I know you're doing it again on Tuesday. You're probably gonna do a hell of a lot more of these before July. But I want to thank you very much because I don't know about you guys, I get inundated every day from every company telling me, come to my company and listen to the thing and my, blah, 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 blah. So I really appreciate Greg jumping on this and trying to ease fears, and he's gonna keep doing that. So first of all, thank you.
Sure.
Second, is there anything that you can think of that you want us to do as your agents differently between now and the time? Do you want us to do anything different with contracts, writings, speaking, dialogues? Is there anything that you think that you want us to do to protect anything between now and whenever? July?
As always, you guys are independent contractors, and I will not dictate what percentages.
I don't mean that, I mean anything.
I know. I am going to work on, and another slide coming up. I'm gonna work on our presentation material. I don't know if I'll implement it all yet, because I don't know enough to. But I think it's wise, given that there are headlines out there. I think you should go in saying, have you seen the headlines? Let's talk about what's reality. Hit them up front. Don't try to put that in the back end and hide from them. We have always been a company of honest, ethical people. And if we know that they're gonna have questions, let's tell them right up front. It's always been negotiable. We believe that our services are worth, and you put in whatever you charge. And we believe you'll be more likely to get a buyer agent to see it if you compensate them in some way. But you have to know it's all negotiable. And if you want to ask the questions, let's ask them now and get them out of the way. Because once we start getting contracts, that's not the time you want to think about what's going to happen.
Did you have something specific in mind
For what, for changing?
for right now?
Oh, no, not at all. I didn't have anything specific, but you know, I mean, Greg's done a lot of research. He's read the laws. He's done more than I have by far. So my question was, is there anything preemptively that he feels we should start doing on listings or buyer contracts or buyer consultations or offers written or anything like that, that he felt would protect the company or get us in a mode of doing what? And I know it's all crystal ball stuff. I just want to know if you thought there was anything we needed to say.
I just think right now you're a one-on-one, you had that discussion up front, so you're not bringing it up at the tail end. And I bring it up front because if you're sitting with a client and they said, okay, 6% great, then their next door neighbor or grandpa calls them and say, hey, have you seen the news? Let's have that conversation up front. But one of the things that occurred to me is VA buyers. Because currently VA buyers are prohibited from paying buyer agency agreement. And this I pulled out of the pamphlet that was 2019. And the Veterans Administration is basically saying through all this, they don't need to pay for a buyer agent because there's enough information on the internet now, they don't need representation. Now, having said that they also say they aren't prohibited from the seller paying the VA. And I think that's a conversation that we will eventually have to have with our VA buyers and with our listing. If somebody comes in and they have a buyer agent and they're a veteran, if you don't pay for it, they have to pay for it. Are you willing to do it? Or are you not willing to do it? But I think it can be a big deal to think about that when you have one part of the government saying the buyer's got to pay for their own, and another part saying the buyer can never pay for that.
Go down to the sentence you're on now, bump it down just a little bit.
I don't know if I
The
can.
VA does not believe that preventing the veteran from paying a buyer broker will harm them.
That's what they said.
That's what it says.
And it
So
said that for 5 or 6 years.
that is just talk about ignorance, government in
So,
full blast.
With all this, and I was gonna say this before you jumped into the slide, I believe that this is gonna start, and this is why I'm gonna approach my buyers moving forward is, okay, while you're hearing and seeing all these headlines and everything, keep in mind, this is probably gonna cost you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Because right now, basically what's happening is you're paying, you're buying this house and they're paying, paying for my services. If we didn't have that, then we would have gone in at a lower price. So now they're gonna still have the same price, but now they're gonna ask you to pay me to represent you. And that means the prices are gonna go higher, or you're gonna pay out of your own pocket. How do you feel about not having any representation? Do you wanna go work directly with the listing agent when they represent the seller? Even though they're required by law to disclose anything and everything they know about the property, how ethical do you feel that listing agent's gonna be?
I've been saying for about 6 months that we need to work on what our value is. I've not guided you through what your value is. Some of you know what your value is very well. The best thing I've heard so far is Chris on Sunday talking to me and Pam. And Chris said, take your last 10 buyer representation deals and write down every problem that you had and meet one of those deals.
Genius.
So if I'm talking to you, Mr. Buyer, let me show you what happened to Joe Smith, and I prevented them from, would I go to a divorce without my own representation? Not no, but hell no. 'Cause even if you're friendly with somebody, it's a good idea to have someone advise you.
Especially all the first time buyers, oh my gosh.
The other thing, just on this VA loan, obviously I work with a couple lenders, y'all work with lenders you trust. I have asked all the lenders I've worked with if since this thing broke, this news broke, if they are hearing anything, any whispers on the winds that they listen to in the lending institution about changing VA things, adding stuff, different programs. He said, so all the lenders I've talked to so far said everybody is radio silent. No changes, no nothing. They are just, lips are zipped as far as anything. We're all doing these get-togethers and meetings and Zooms and all that stuff. Right now, the lending institutions are silent.
I suspect that there's no way this is gonna be adopted by July. I think the headlines were very premature. And, you know, they slashed their commission from 6%. Well, they've never been 6%. The Realtor organization didn't set that. But that's the kind of thing, if you're informed, you can talk to your client about. I think some of the big guys are gonna have problems. I think lenders have to change their procedures, and who knows what it does to appraisers. Lance pointed out, you know, they're gonna start looking, is the guy paying for a buyer agent or not? And if not, they're going to decrease the house. I talked to one well-known developer in this area who was really looking forward to this because he'll get to keep the extra money.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, I don't think that, he's just sure that there will be no BAs anymore and that they don't, and he'll get to keep more money.
Yeah.
And I think it's gonna drive the price of the houses down, but, you know, that's my opinion.
So
Greg,
when it comes to
Just a
the,
second, Dixie.
when it comes to the MLS rules. Once a contract or once a home has sold and it's done. You know, we have to go in and we have to fill out, okay, this is what it's sold for, here's the concessions. Does this judgment or this thing keep us from putting in what commission was paid after the fact?
I have no idea. They said eliminate that field.
Yeah.
Now, if that field is gone, can it be part of what's put in afterwards for the appraisers to get information? I don't know.
Well, I want that, I'd like that information because if I'm meeting with a seller. And I need to know what kind of price range to put on the house, and I'm looking at the past solds, what did those sellers pay?
I understand, you know, every time. In my humble opinion, every time the government gets involved and writes a new rule or law. They create 10 others that they didn't foresee. You can't write one law that. Umbrellas everything. We're gonna have some issues to work through.
Conspiracy theory.
Dixie, you had a question, I'm sorry.
yeah, so when we're running numbers through our clients, our seller clients, and those comps are with commissions paid. So that's a good way to just make sure that we tell them, this is if you're paying a full commission, full 6%. I mean, that's just gonna be explanatory to them, or you're gonna sell for less because that's not including that commission now.
See, everybody thinks they're gonna get rich on it, which side of they're on and who pays what and so on, and the fact is. Chris and I talked about this Sunday. There's only one person at the closing table who is paying everybody. They pay the seller, they pay the agents, they pay the lender, they pay and we have this perception. That just because the listing is offering this of the amount of money I'm keeping, still came from you. We're moving which column it's in, that's it.
Yep.
That's
That's why I've always been a big believer that there needed to be more transparency in what was being paid and offered, instead of pulling it from everybody, it should be exposed to everybody.
Okay, perfect idea. Let's do this. Let's turn the entire industry on its head. Because the buyer is the one that brings the money. Why don't we offer compensation to the listing agent?
Well, not quite the
You
end
gotta
on
laugh,
that,
man, you gotta laugh.
not quite the end on that, Joe.
Jeez.
There is a group of high dollar agents in California that have decided, and they decided this about 3 weeks ago, that the Realtor organization was passed and was dead and was causing a lot of problems, and they wanted to start their own professional affiliation. And the claim is they've got about 30% of all realtors would welcome that. So there's a lot of stuff going on. that-
Not having to pay dues, you know.
Oh,
that-
yeah, you're right, because they're gonna do it for
You-
free.
If you don't understand the value of what you pay in your dues, then that's easy to believe. Yeah, we'll do this.
And how hard is it going to be to start MLSs again from nothing? And so there's a lot of stuff that are moving, like I said, moving
Will
pieces.
this make the MLS so you don't have to be a Realtor member to use it then?
They've been working on that for a long time.
Well,
And that's another conspiracy
the way it
theory that
is.
this is,
That's the way it is in Colorado.
yeah.
It costs $5 more a month if you're not a Realtor.
And it is that way in Atlanta and it's that way in California. And they have different dues and there's all kinds of things.
Well, here's a hot take from me. This is just my hot take, and I know it's gonna go against what everybody else thinks, but I think NAR did a hell of a job for us. And here's why I think that. I foresaw a thing where lawsuits, you were gonna see advertisements on TV for attorneys, like auto accidents. They were gonna be sue your last realtor. If you paid any commission over the last year, sue your realtor. We'll go after them individually. I foresaw that coming because it was gonna get out of hand, right? And by the Realtor organization putting an umbrella over us, for the most part, the individual agents, we can't get sued. There's gonna be no ambulance chasers coming after us.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. Berkshire Hathaway's people are gonna be like, oh my God, you screwed me over, NAR, wah. Right? I'm sorry, Berkshire Hathaway decided not to settle or to keep litigating. I'm sorry that happened. But I think that for me, like I said, and I may be looking at it completely wrong, but I think they did a hell of a job by trying to protect us as much as they could. Because now I don't have an ambulance chaser coming out. I don't want to be Brad Postotnick's next case,
Well,
right?
sort
Not that
of,
Brad's bad. He's,
sort of going against you. Anywhere had already done that for us with their settlements.
yeah.
That we're waiting to find out for 5th of May or something, whether it'll be accepted. And Remax did that. And then a couple of weeks ago, Keller Williams did that. And it still leaves a lot of companies out there that haven't. And I still say there's going to be a lot of these really big companies that are going to be mad at NAR and will have
They are.
some influence.
They are.
So, okay, if there are no more questions, I'm gonna stop my screen share.
Show me yours, I'll show you mine.
I'm glad you all stuck with us.
We're
Are
gonna
there
talk
any,
conspiracy theories now. So if you guys want to leave, Chris and I are gonna have a couple of thought sharing ideas. Kind of outside of the box of what we've heard now.
Chris, Cheryl, Chris and I were talking earlier this morning, you know, we're in the process of rewriting courses for RSCK. I literally want to stop. I just want, we're meeting this afternoon.
Well, but
And I'm like-
addendums and amendments,
Yeah,
that's
I'm
not
like-
gonna change that.
I'm like,
Could be the
What?
poopy pants.
but no, but think about it.
It'll change it all.
All of it's gonna come, I mean, why spend all this time rewriting the class when in August, September, October, we're gonna have to change it all again?
Oh, you're poopy pants.
Well, then me and Brenda are booby pants with them. We
Yeah.
pooped our pants, Lance.
I think there's so many questions because it's hard to read through all this stuff. It's 108 pages. The rules take 1 page. They're changing. Everything else is who's involved, when the timing is, if you're a big broker, if you're not. So the rules are relatively simple, but they're simple without fully delving into where they need to be.
What,
Who wrote that
what
sticker,
are
you
we-
can see buyers reducing
My
sales price by
conspiracy theory?
3%.
I bet it's possibly the
Read
same.
it.
What if the RSCK was to create just a platform within their website where we can just go in and put
Hmm,
here's the listing, or here's the address, and here's the compensation. It's not in the MLS, but it's,
And part of the
It's
rule
separate.
said, and I read it earlier, they cannot give a data feed to anybody that's gonna
It's-
aggregate that.
National Association, every association down.
So much for the separation of church and state then.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, that's part of
going
the.
That's going away too.
Well,
You guys know what I mean when I say church and state, because the MLS is supposed to be separate from the
well,
association.
ours is because it's a separate company, but that's not true everywhere. And this will affect also the ones that are owned or partially owned by realtors. They have to abide by that rule. Now, let's look at PIN, which is up like around Jersey or something. They are not affiliated with realtors at all. Will they have to be included in this or not? Or if any of their realtor members, do we have to do that because we're realtor members? Covered by the same set of rules and code of ethics?
Some new backdoor MLSs.
Is our RPR is a part of NAR, right?
Yeah.
NAR's.
It's a benefit of NAR, yeah.
I love RPR.
So
Okay, so here-
you're, I wanna go. What is your
Here's
conspiracy?
my conspiracy theory, and I heard this from someone else, it wasn't my original, I just happened after I've been dwelling on it for a minute. So, because if you're in a conspiracy theory, it's awesome, right? So here's a conspiracy theory that I happen to like, I don't know that it's true. So, they've been trying to do this for how many decades?
3 at least.
3-4 decades?
Well, buyer agency here has been around since '96, so.
Okay, so 3 decades, 30 years-ish. So here's the thing. They've been coming after us. They've been trying to get this done. They've been trying to break, they being, you know, the people that want to sue for buyer agency, for agent, antitrust and all that.
Department of Justice, yeah.
Department of
Yeah.
Justice, right? Why now? Why all of a sudden did a little case in Minnesota explode to 159 cases and billions of dollars? I mean, why did it happen? Right? So it's all, like Greg said, it's all because of money. Now, I personally don't believe it's just the attorneys. The attorneys are gonna make a ton of money, but who has the power in this world, in this country?
The Russians?
The Russians,
Yeah.
right? Who has the power in this country to do what would be needed to be done to
So far, we're
replace,
on the same page.
to replace if the Realtor Association was to crumble, this industry were to crumble?
We're on the
Who
same
has
page.
the power to replace and potentially make billions?
The
And destroy home ownership potentially, keep this country locked down into a state of renters.
See, and I agree, I disagree with that part. So my conspiracy theory is not that they want to keep the housing market down or they want to hurt buyers and sellers. I don't believe they want to. I believe they want to keep it healthy and happy and thriving. But they want the money from the realtors. They want the money from the housing. And the only people in my, like I said, it's just conspiracy bullshit.
Attorneys.
Google. And
Oh.
Amazon.
Oh.
Google controls internet space. Google controls everything.
That's really fair. That's
Web
good.
servers are the only ones that
Yeah.
have the power.
Yeah, and they've been fighting us since they existed.
Well, I'm gonna suggest something. 'cause
But
don't
like I said,
believe in
I'm a whack job.
conspiracy theory. I know that everybody in this room has dealt with an agent on the other side of the table that should not be an agent. I think the bar is too low to become a real estate agent. The bar needs to be higher so we get more professionals in here, and then we wouldn't be having these problems with the commissions and all the other things. That's my humble opinion.
Okay, Greg, thank you.
I'm gonna end this, guys. Thank you all.
Poor
Appreciate it.
Julio.
But I'm a whack. That's just.
Well, no.
I have a